Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Film Alchemist podcast, the pod where we take the movies you love, break them apart to find out what gives them their magique. I am your host, co-host Alex Dandino, soon to be joined by the real host, Josh Griffey. The Lestat to ma Louis. I'm sure you guys will understand what we're talking about soon. That's right, we're in the middle of the horror beast. 31 pods, 31 days. Guys, thanks for sticking in with us. We got some great hosts, and our friends coming out shortly are no exception. They are Barbara and Bryant Dillon from Fanbase Press. If you know Fanbase Press, they do great books like Keensay, Nuclear Power, and Penguins versus Possums, which was actually the first book I bought from them. They're lovely people. They decided to come on the show to talk to us about Interview with a Vampire, which, as you might know, T. Cruz, Brad Pitt, Kirsten Dunst, great time. Honestly, it was one of my favorite pods we've done. They had incredible insights. It's like one of Brian's favorite movies. It was so awesome to talk to him about it. He had such awesome things to say. Some stuff I wasn't even thinking about. It's great. Special note, we are all parents, of course. Bryant and Barbara just had, they had twins. They have twins. So if you hear children in the background, my kid included, you might hear some cooing, some awing, some crying here and there. Don't be alarmed. All the children were okay. No children were harmed in making this pod, but nevertheless, just in case you're curious, there is some audio in the background of some kids crying, some kids cooing, so on and so forth. But nevertheless, it was a good pod. It was a wonderful talk. Guys, let's get into it. I am really excited. This is going to be a great episode. We have special guests here for, of course, our month of horror, the Horror Abyss. Another wonderful special guests, in fact. I think this might be the first time we've had a duo on, which is kind of cool. Bryant and Barbara Dillon from Fanbase Press are joining us to talk about this most awesome movie that I think is a little off the beaten path for like everything else we're watching this month. Right, Griff?
Yeah, I wonder what this movie plays like if you weren't in the 90s, right? This was kind of like the Walmart sex novella brought to life. Yeah, it was Twilight for like our moms. But yeah, it's very, so just in case you guys haven't figured it out, right? All the cheekbones and such. Interview with the Vampire. And I love this movie. So I think this
movie
great
is
pick,
awesome,
guys.
by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just get, guys, why did you guys pick Interview with the Vampire? Out of curiosity.
I guess that's on me.
Yes.
I was under the impression that Barbara liked this film as much as I did, but apparently she's just fascinated and likes to watch it while I go through my periodic rewatches. But yeah, this is for me. This is my peak vampire film. I had a mother who was into Interview with the Vampire.
Oh yes, we all did.
I was sort of fed it that way, you know. I think I saw the film first, and then as I got into my teens, I started going through the first couple books. I got lost. Anne Rice really wrote an entire universe, so at some point I was like, all right, I can't read all of these, but I was pretty well versed throughout my like teens and 20s in the Anne Rice, I guess, Vampire Chronicles, and so this seemed like a good chance to revisit the film.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
So, Barbara, are you saying that you weren't given the choice that Dillon was?
It's very true.
I think I might have watched this movie when it came out, but in meeting Bryant in college, Bryant was like this uber vampire fan across all genres, across all fandoms. I mean, from Buffy to Anne Rice, it was all vampires all the time. I really don't like this movie.
Oh, shit! Now it's getting good.
I've seen it a number of times now. And so I think this time around in rewatching it, I've really kind of dug in and started asking, like, what is it about this movie that you like? Tell me more about what it is about this performance that fascinates you, or this scene that's intriguing, because I just don't get it. But encourage his fandom and I encourage his enjoyment of the movie and the books. But I thought it would be fun to tag along and participate in this discussion.
Podwives, take note. It's encouragement that keeps this thing going. Encouragement.
Indeed.
So, Bryant, what is it about vampires specifically, right? What is it about vampires that do it for you?
That's a difficult question. I think that there is obviously something in my teenage life that, like many teenagers, I was drawn to this idea of being young forever and kind of being able to rebel against the standards of society and the rules of even, I guess, the natural world. There's something very rebellious, whether you're talking about Lestat in this film or the Lost Boys with David and his gang, or even in Buffy. There are quite a few vampires that are rebellious and sort of throw their two fingers up at the rest of the world. Even within vampire society, So I think that it was basically like my punk rock. Was like get into vampires, get into Vampire the Masquerade, the role-playing game, dressed with the trench coats and everything, and so this
Awesome.
this fit right in there. I was a broody teen, and so I could both relate to Louis, his life of pain, constant pain and suffering, and also like Lestat's sort of just again rebellion, just throwing shade at the standards of the time.
I like that. I like the way I'd forgotten how this movie started. Like, it literally just starts as an interview. I did not remember that. I thought it was much more surprising and like Christian Slater's character was Malloy, right? Malloy's I thought he was much more taken aback, and it starts then like so matter of factly. I was like, oh wow, we are just like getting into this. I usually. The first time I saw this, I think it was on AMC, and I saw it like when I was a teenager, much younger. And I think I started after all that happened. Like I started after he was turned by Lestat. Sure. So I had missed like the preamble and everything like that, and then watched it years later. And I was like, oh wow. And I'm still startled every time. I was like, this really starts matter of fact. Like it feels like Christian Slater gets over the fact that this guy is a vampire like really fast. Which is kind of cool.
Yeah, what choice do you have?
Yeah, I like that he's just like, all right, I guess we're just doing this.
It's the big kind of burning question at the center of the film. Because I remember the first time I heard of this movie, I think AMC used to do this amazing clip show every Halloween. Whereas like the 25 or 50, 40, something like that. Yeah, like 100. The scariest moments in movies, right?
Okay.
And I would live for this fucking show. Because this was back before the internet, so... You just had word of mouth or like covers on VHS. So you're like dying to find like what's the coolest movie. And they showed the scene of him like mauling the vampires, right? Lighting everyone on fire, cutting them in half. And so I was like, oh, well, Interview with the Vampire is going to be metal as fuck. I got to go find this movie. And then I watched it and I was like, what is all of this talking and sadness? And it was such a different movie than what I had thought. But I think it's kind of one of those movies that as I've gotten older, I found more and more things I actually like. I think it's one of the vampire movies that doesn't deal with the youthfulness of it as much, even though they do look at it. But this is kind of it gets to the point of the vampirism, like you're saying, is like, I just don't want to die. And I think we can all relate to that. There's this burning question I have at the start of the movie, though, which is why the fuck is he giving this guy the interview? Do you have any idea what that would mean? Like, why stop and tell this story? Because they hint at that maybe he was hunting Christian Slater. And then for some reason, so for some reason he stops, perhaps because he just wants to unburden himself. And what is going to be the consequence of this interview? What did you make of that, Bryant?
It's interesting because the character, Christian Slater's character, Daniel, becomes a bigger character in the books. He goes on to reappear and eventually become a vampire himself, despite his interaction with Louis. That goes kind of the same way, where Louis is just disgusted that he even asks for that. I think Louis is sort of and it was something I think that was mysterious to me as a teenager, where I kind of got hints of it, but I couldn't really put the pieces together. I look at it now older, and I think Louis is supposed to represent just this not only like sort of the suffering and depression that people can go through in long periods of times, and how quickly time can pass when you're stuck in that place, but I think he also represents sort of this 90s disillusionment. And I guess it had to be even earlier, because I mean, this book was written in the 70s. So Anne Rice had to be exploring some of these thoughts, at that time. But this disillusionment of like, I don't really know why life exists. I don't know why all this suffering exists. I don't know what part I play in it. If I'm good, bad, indifferent, And so I think part of that is him trying to just almost go with a feeling that, like, when Daniel starts to talk to him and ask if he wants, it seems like Daniel's just like one of these interview hounds. He gets interviews, he probably sells them to, various outlets. And so I think when Daniel surprises him by asking him for this interview, I think there's part of him that's like, well, maybe this, I've never done this. Maybe telling this story will give some sort of purpose to others. Because at the end, I think he even referenced, I noticed at this time, where he's like, take this story, give it to others. Maybe you can learn something from it, but he doesn't even know exactly what that is. And I think that's because Louis is a character who never feels, even though he becomes more confident with things like, oh, right, I'm going to accept killing to a degree. I'm going to accept who I am to a degree and my nature. I don't think he ever finds peace. He's constantly tormented and can't really let go of the humanity that's still sort of buried within him that other vampires seem to not have. They almost seem attracted to it in this film. They like that he still has that in him. So,
well, there is something to the idea of drinking blood for life, but not actually getting any life, right? That's one of the things I really like, is how they show the vampire is kind of constant appetite, right? It's very sensual and powerful. And at a certain point, you're like, you can go to the Old Country Buffet and have all the, fucking chocolate fondue you want. On like the 8th day, you'd be like, oh my God, I'm done. And the hollowing out of these characters I love, right? There is a funny thing at that part too, when Louis like, oh, I failed again. And that's like, if you tell anyone this story, we're all going to want to be the vampire, because we can't be in your headspace. We just want the cool powers and all the shit that goes along with that, right? I think it's very human and relatable, a lot of that kind of stuff. And I do think, Alex, that Louis doth protest too much. Like, can you really be fucking sad for this long? Like, he is such a mopey bitch this entire
It's interesting,
movie.
though. Like, I mean, I kind of... It's weird.
I'll give you like 50 to 100 years, right?
I've got... Well, we've all have children. And I got to say, like, I'm now a dad and a husband, both. And this is the first time I've watched this movie and been like, wow, I would probably be hunting for death too if like I lost like my entire family and I was just rich as hell.
I did forget about the wife and the kid backstory.
Being super rich and lonely, I'm like, yeah, I guess I probably would be like on the hunt for a thrill to just like, maybe it'll end it all. Who knows? Like, it was this like oddly relatable thing this time of like, I guess and it's interesting. I did not know the book was written in the 70s, because I do think that Louis' temperament is like this very specific kind of 90s vibe. Like, this movie came out in 94, and it does have this almost like grunge texture to it. Like, it's really strange to put it that way, but it is like this.
You think Louis would be at Woodstock 99?
and we just watched Woodstock 99. Yeah, like, I mean, right. I think he'd be a huge Mudhoney fan, and it's no, but like,
I came for Mudhoney and I got corned. No,
but it is this like really. It is like this really specific loneliness that I was like, oh God, I think I'd probably be doing the same shit.
Yeah.
Like, I would have no
It's weird that you say that, because I feel like I didn't put it together, but Louis not that far from Kurt Cobain in temperament or outlook on life.
Yeah, I didn't think about that either. Wow.
90s icon,
And you have that feel of like, Kurt had that feel like, he had a life that most people would look at and be like, why don't you want this life? I would kill for this life. And he's like, you just don't fucking get it. You know, like, and I think that is part of the aesthetic for that character of like, there's something in him that is almost too, you're going to laugh when I say this, but too sensitive for this world to a degree, which is ironic, because
I don't disagree.
He's brought in to be a vampire, I think, because that attracts something like Lestat. We see it attract Armand later. Mm-hmm. But
Yeah.
and again, he may like think Louis seems to think like, oh well, maybe this will be my way out of the pain, and it just brings him more. And I feel like that's
Yeah.
the story of his life, is like he keeps trying to find a reason to go on, and every exit is like, nope, life has no point and sucks.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, he really is a glutton for there's a funny thing I took this because it is fun. I think every generation, right, you have your moment of disillusion, right? Whether it was World War I or II, the Great Depression, Vietnam was probably a big thing on the mind when this book was written. We all go through that. I think it's just coming of age and being like, oh, I wanted this my whole childhood to grow up, and now I'm here, and oh, this sucks, right? Like, this is all it is. And so I think that's something I know a lot of people in the creative fields, right? It's something that a lot of us fear all the time is, what happened if tomorrow, like we used to do this thought experiment at the bar, right? What if you're sitting there like drinking a beer and Spielberg's walks in and he's like, here's your fucking giant movie contract. You can do whatever you fucking want. And you get everything you ever dreamed of. And you woke up the next day and you were still sad. You know, and there's something just primal to that. And I think one of the things I really took away from Louis this time was he talked about that what if the guilt and the loneliness and sadness was the only thing he had left, right? And so I
especially
think in
like
a way,
remembering his daughter, especially
yes,
with that.
exactly. And I think there's a real survivor's guilt tone, which is kind of a fun thing that they don't really do a lot in vampirism movies, right? The guilt that not only is he going to survive his wife and kids, but that he's going to survive them by centuries, maybe forever, right? So there's something to that survivor's guilt, and that maybe vampirism to Louis is a way to just keep flagellating himself, right? For fear that maybe someday, you know, the pain would subside and he could move on. Maybe Louis really wanted to lock himself in that grief. I don't know. What did you think of that, Alex? You're kind of a Louis by nature.
It's true. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's exactly it's like what Bryant said, like clinging on to that last bit of that last shred of humanity is what keeps you, in Louis's case, I guess, kind of sane. Like it's such a strange thing because like every other vampire story, every other vampire character that we really, other than probably like maybe Angel, who like is the only character who after he's like woken up kind of hates being a vampire a lot of the time, but embraces it eventually. But it's sort of the same thing. Like Louis really spends like the top of the movie like loathing this vampiric existence, like, and really putting himself in through with like so much punch, like drinking rats and all kinds of stuff, when he's like and not only that, like there's just this like drug pusher living in his house like Lestat, who's just like, come on man, it's the good stuff, like constantly like trying to get him to play. It's this really strange, like it's this very strange loneliness that I think is entirely relatable. And I think that's like the thing that I think is most interesting about the movie in general, is that I've never watched vampire movies thinking I'm going to relate to most of the characters. And this is the first one I've ever watched where I was like, I kind of get it. Like you would not like probably love your existence. Like you can only be out at night and so much. And not only that, like when you finally find some sort of solace in like Kirsten Dunst's character, for instance,
oh man,
eventually she's going to figure out what the deal is. And yeah, she does. And it becomes this like horrible thing, and then kind of nice, and then like you just go through that pain all over again, as we find out. Like it's just this, it's weird. I guess I would probably just, yeah, like you'd probably clam up too and just be like, I can't do this anymore, I'm just going to be a vampire, be by myself. It's weird.
Yeah. Barbara, what did you, so I know you said you didn't love this movie, right? But is there something about this kind of vampire that didn't sit well with you? Or is it more just the construction of the movie? What did you make of the way they represented vampires in this flick?
You know, I really didn't, having seen most of the vampiric content that Bryant has consumed over the years, I really don't have any issue with the depiction of vampires, or, you know, and honestly, I find it fascinating to hear what everyone is taking away from the depiction of these vampires and the impact that the story can have. For me, it was really, I think, two things: the construction of the movie. I know I talked to Bryant off air about the pacing of the film. I think that the it seemed like there was like a 4-act construction of the film, and it just was like took a really long time and some odd turns. But the performances were what really I just couldn't deal with, which is probably shocking. But I generally enjoy I enjoy Brad Pitt as an actor, but his performance was so sorry for the babies was so abysmal in this movie. I just couldn't get through it. I could not. I think that he and Bryant told me that in the production he had issues with the contact lenses, that they were really impacting his performance, and so he wasn't enjoying that. But I felt like he could have given any sort of performance and it would have been more than what he gave in this movie. It just felt so bland and flat that even there were times when I thought that Kirsten Dunst was giving, apologies again for the babies, that she was giving a better performance and a more impactful performance than Brad Pitt. But I felt like a lot of the motivation of the characters did not come through in the performances. There was one scene, I think, that Brian pointed out, and I was like, okay, I can see in this moment that there is some subtext to the performances of these two characters. And it was a Tom Cruise, Kirsten Dunst scene. But that's it. I was like, why are people attracted to one another? These characters are so flat and bland that, like, what is the attraction? What is the subtext? What's going on that there's some sort of charisma connecting the two? And I felt like that for most of the performances throughout the entire movie.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's sorry.
No, you know what? That's really it. The Brad Pitt performance, because I also read, Brad Pitt actually called David Geffen at one point and was like, how do I get out of this? And they're like, it costs $40 million to get you out of the movie. And he's like, all right, I guess I'll just do it.
Yeah.
But and it's interesting too, because Brad Pitt was this was in 94 and I think this came out after whatever. There's some movie that really, this was one of the
big one right before this.
There was a big one right before this
maybe?
one.
No.
Maybe, somewhere it was right in that wheelhouse where he was starting to become like Brad Pitt. And it's interesting, that's how they started releasing the movie too. But it's so fascinating that because I actually think Brad Pitt's stoicism is one of those things in the movie that I kind of glob onto because I'm so used to him being kind of manic and kind of weird. It's weird. We've actually watched a lot of Brad Pitt movies recently. We watched 12 Monkeys, recently for the pod and all that stuff, and I'm just used to very charismatic Brad Pitt's scenes, so I guess maybe I'm just used to that, and because I've seen it so recently, I was like, oh wow, Brad Pitt's really bringing it down. And it's weird because Griffey actually hates Tom Cruise, so I was wondering
I fucking hate Tom Cruise.
I was wondering how this
I
would go.
fucking hate him, so I won't do it. Everyone who listens to the show has heard me do my Tom Cruise routine. But it works for Tom. This movie actually is weirdly how I assume Tom Cruise behaves in real life. I think he's not a human. I think he has no human quality and has no reason to interact. I think he's just like a machine, right? Like a prop. But this movie, I was like, I do think he probably thinks of us as less than and food for him. So yeah, it works. But to the Brad Pitt point, right? There's a quality to him, and I think there's kind of an intentional emptiness, right? And that he almost has this Dante Inferno's quality, right? He's being led through hell and just observing these fucking insane, chaotic things. And every now and again, we just need a kind of hollow vessel to sit within and feel safe enough. Because Kirsten Dunst is probably the best part of the movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think
and
so.
Tom
She's
Cruise
really good,
is fucking. I love what Tom Cruise is doing in this. It's so funny. I remember Anne Rice. I was reading that she was furious when Tom Cruise was cast. But then she actually wrote him an apology after because she liked what he brought so much.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But yeah, so I think they're both going so high, right? And by the time we hit Paris, the vampires are just fucking fully old world insane bastards. That the fact that he's just kind of this hollowed out space, this beautiful hollowed out cheekboned boat for us to ride in, I think is probably somewhat, because you can't have him just matching the craziness at all times, I feel like, right?
Right.
And there's also a part, right? We have to imagine that this is his memories or Christian Slater's imagining. So there's a very dreamlike separation out where the Louis character is not as involved in the segments as possible. But yeah, I mean, I agree. He's definitely just kind of Ryan Gosling-ing his way through this, right?
It's a good comparison.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Early
Yes, that's a
Gosling,
great-
not as much.
That's a
as
great way to put it.
Gosling would make a great Louis, honestly.
He would be a great Louis,
I
right?
think that might even be better because I still think that there's like this with Ryan Gosling's performances in every movie that he's ever done. There's still like a magnetism or a charisma even with the quiet brooding, and I don't get that at all with Brad Pitt. It's just like completely an empty void.
Wow.
And that's so unfortunate.
See, I really love this performance of Pitt's, but that's just because this is who Louis is to me. He is hollowed out by the end. I think he even comments he ends the interview by saying like, I go on, I'm detached. You know? Yeah.
He says I'm empty, and they're like, that's not how the story can end. And he's like, but it did.
It does.
Like, it's already there, dude. The story's already over. But yeah, but that's what I mean though. Like, I think that stillness too, it leads to that really awesome crescendo, right? When he breaks out of the casket at the end, where you can tell that Armand has set him up, right? And Claudia gets it. When he comes out and he looks at the kind of like carnival barker vampire, there is a fucking raw fire in his face, right? Yes. Whether it was just like, you know how they say for actors, like, use your pain, and he's like, I fucking hate being here. And he was imagining staring at the costume department or whoever. But the fucking raw intensity and rage of that moment, right? When he sees Claudia and she crumbles to ash and he just stares at that guy, I felt the pain of that through the screen. I was like, holy shit. It's like he's going to get me for like participating and watching it. So that the subtle Louis actually lends like a real power to that moment. But yeah, I mean, Louis very, very still in this, but let's talk about T. Cruz. Let's get that fucking robot out of the way, Alex. Well, I mean, this is probably amongst his most beloved performances, right? What did you love about what he was bringing to the table as Lestat?
I think he just really nailed the character. I can not fault anyone for having issues with Tom Cruise. He is the man, not the vampire. Yes, a lot to take as an individual. But he also, I feel like he also commits to certain roles with that intensity. And this is one where I think he was galvanized by the reaction from Anne Rice. And he really dove into this world. I remember he did a lot of studying. He learned how to play the piano for the role. He studied the character. And it just, for me, again, this is the Lestat that I see when I imagine Lestat. He has every element. And I guess what I really do appreciate about Tom Cruise's performance is it seems like there was no fear about the homoerotic undertones or the feminine nature that Lestat sometimes has, or the ambiguous nature. And he could be both vicious and scary, but also completely reading as a gay character. And so I find that really interesting. And I also, this time watching it, what I find is I feel like what I see in these characters is that Louis is sort of raw. He is sort of honest with what he is feeling and just wears everything on his sleeve. He's, you can see it in his face. Lestat I don't know that he's that much different. Clearly he doesn't have the remorse that Louis has. But this time what I felt was he's putting on a facade about this anger and sort of like rock star vampire, but he really just wants a family. Consistently what he's trying to do is find companionship, and he can't, but like many humans I know, he can't really hold it together because he's unable to sort of drop his ego at times. There's times, specifically with Claudia, where he relates to her very intensely. He has a love for her, but he can't say I'm sorry. He gets angry when he's confronted with his own faults, and so he lashes out. And he does the same thing to Louis. I think anytime he's confronted with his own faults, he becomes angry, and you can see that in some of the more specifically in some of the questioning that comes, where they want to know, like, what are we? Shouldn't we know more about like good and evil and God and the devil? And Lestat is just kind of angry that they even ask these questions, Right. I think because he doesn't know either, and he doesn't want to contemplate these thoughts, right. So it works for me.
He's sort of this, like, it's interesting because he's this like he's just this vampire's vampire. Because like I be like when I was younger, I picked up on the homoeroticism a lot more. I think this viewing in particular, and I don't know if this just comes with age and it being 2021 or something like that, but I was just like recontextualizing it for myself. I'm like, this just feels more about having power over people that you've made yourself. Like it has much more like, because when I was younger, it was very much that. And then I felt more as I got older that it was much more about the power. Because I agree. I think that him not having the answer to like the whys of the vampire world is actually like his biggest insecurity. So instead, he just kind of like whips it out, so to speak, and just like constantly like trying to like tell these guys what to do. It's this really strange, actually like really alpha male domination that he tries to pull over on Claudia and Louis a lot.
Well, I think to the point, right, is he mentions it as in the one point when he says there's no creature that's more like God than we are, right?
Right.
And so I think there's a thing with him that I feel like he wants Louis to so desperately reaffirm his lifestyle, right? I think he goes out and again, he's just pure appetite, right? He just will have sex with anything. He will bite anything. He just always wants those like immediate pleasures. And so his whole game is just that, right? And I think he feels hollow and empty, but he can't admit it. That's why he likes only the aristocrat blood and the fancier old ways, right? It gives him something to latch on to. And Louis supposed to be the guy that's there, you know, being like his fucking Flavor Flav hype man, right? Like, this is awesome. This is a dark gift. I love biting hookers all the time. And when Louis pulls back, because Louis's whole mantra is, I will refuse to partake in any joy, right? That's his, you know, fucking Hot Topic kid lot in life, is he's just going to refuse to have any moment of happiness, right? Except for with Claudia. But because he's so pulled back, he refuses to acknowledge that Lestat's life is awesome. And I think that's a really hard thing for him to see, right? I think Lestat sees him as the guy who has his chest open, you know, shoot me, kill me. You have no conviction. He sees someone he thinks is going to appreciate this life. And he has to confront that this is truly just a curse. And I thought that dynamic of the movie was exceptional, honestly. Like I like the kind of patheticness of all of these vampires, right? Just with all of this gift, like Lestat's constant need to have human trinkets, right? Whether it's fancier clothes or fancy stuff. It's like, why do you need all that? And there's just a kind of sad, empty patheticness to it that I think's really relatable.
I totally agree.
All right, well, so now that we're on Lestat, right? Lestat's story intersects in a really fun way with Claudia. And maybe it's because I'm a parent. We're all parents here on this call, right? This might be our first ever all-parent film Alchemist. But
I think it is, yeah.
I found Claudia to be, if the whole movie had just been that, like, I think that would have been so awesome. Because I'd like to know what you guys make of this section of the film, right? Because there's so many questions, right? Why does Louis lose control with her in that moment, right? After berating Lestat about the whores, right? Why her? Why that moment? When Lestat's about to turn her, he grabs the hand to stop her, but then he doesn't. What did you make of this segment of the film, guys?
I would say that this is just this is part of the what feeds into, I think, Louis's sort of struggle with what life is, or what good and evil is, because he can't resist killing people. He can't resist the hunger, even though he wants to. He feels guilt for it, and he makes this, like, I think it's almost fate. He comes across this girl and has a moment of weakness, and of course Lestat is there to witness it all, and twist the knife and use it against him. And then I think that there's, again, the human need for companionship in both of them. Lestat uses, it's very, like, we think about it all the time. They had a kid to save the marriage. And this is exactly what
that
is
was
happening
my first thought
here,
too.
you know?
Yep.
and it happens just the way that it does in a human, life. Like she gets 30 years in and then starts to realize, become aware of things, and all of a sudden she's picking parents or pitting parents against each other, and they're having to deal with the sins that they committed that are now being brought up. So I find it fascinating that Louis finds enough happiness in this child to stick with Lestat for 30 years after everything he goes through at the beginning of the film. And then that also becomes that her death becomes sort of the defining moment for him for the rest of his unlife, if you will. And that is also really fascinating if you know that this book was inspired by the fact that Anne Rice's daughter died of leukemia when she was 4. And it was a story where she had a short story about a vampire being interviewed, but came back to it after this horrible depression after her child died. And it seems like the entire first book is just a contemplation on how do you exist after you've lost a child? What is life after that?
Yeah, I think that's like a universal, every parent's absolute fucking worst nightmare, right? So, yeah, I really latched onto that. Barbara, what did you take away from Claudia watching this film?
I agree with what everyone has said so far. And honestly, as I mentioned earlier, the one scene that I think really shone through and demonstrated a lot of subtext and development with the characters was the scene when it appears as though Claudia is coming back to make amends with Lestat, and he's playing the piano, and she entices him to come over and see the gift that she's provided for him, and he's lashing out as he does because that is his way of his defense mechanism to protect himself. But for a moment, you see this pause that he gives in because he doesn't want to have this shield. He wants to have this connection with her. And it's this amazing moment that it's like, oh, there's acting going on in this movie.
There's a specific
cinema.
A specific line that you pointed out that I think is great, where because she's like trying to make amends and he's just throwing it back in her face, and then she says something like, "Well, what? I have something for you," and he says, I hope it's a woman with endowments you'll never possess."
I mean, right?
And she actually responds as if she's hurt. Like, why would you say such things? And he has a moment where he's like, what a dick I am. Yeah. He feels that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm hurting this person I love. But again, he can't say, I'm sorry, Yeah,
like cruelty is just such a second language for him, right? It's just, I think that bit too, because that plays into one of the things I really love about Claudia. I think she's one of my favorite because they have this too with I think his name was Hector in Near Dark, right? He's like the frozen child vampire. And earlier you had mentioned, right, one of the things that is alluring about vampires is this eternal youth, right? This kind of Peter Pan fantasy. This is really getting at the core of what that really looks like, right? To freeze yourself and not be able to grow up and experience all of these things that are just built into our natural biology. And the watching Lestat, like Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, you're like, all right, they're like grown-ups, grown-ups do orgies and all kinds of weird stuff. Like, I can imagine like grown-ups getting into weird shit, right? When you see Kirsten Dunst in this movie looking almost like a Shirley Temple, right? When you see her getting into that kind of behavior, like killing the dressmaker, and the scene when she reveals that she has the corpse of that lady under the dolls, right? Because she just wants to be a fully formed sexual woman. I mean, that scene, I was like, that's just about as devastating a horror movie moment is, the slashing and stuff from the clip show is one thing. That is a truly depraved moment, right? This little girl who doesn't know what's happening and can't make heads or tails of the world, which we were all in, right? Imagine having puberty for like a century, right? And she takes this woman. She's literally just a plaything to her. And the analogy, and I thought they used her. I mean, devastating is just the best word to me, right? Because it just is soul crushing every time Claudia's on screen. Because there's nothing we as an audience can do to help her, and the inevitability of it going bad is just obvious. What do you make of that, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, it's a correlation. It's, it's a really horrifying thing. Cause like, I never thought about it when I was younger, but I guess like, I was like, wow, if you are stuck in a kid body, but your brain keeps going, you're like the neurons that are firing exponentially more terrifying and like to look at your body to not change is just no wonder the fact that she was as subdued as she was for so long, the fact that she was such a cold-blooded killer and was able to accomplish, like, shouldn't she just be like a straight up serial killer,
Yeah.
It's this really fascinating it's a really fascinating thing, but also just like it is like the most tragic, like when she cuts her hair might be the scariest movie. It might be the scariest scene in the movie, honestly. Like
really
her
sad.
realizing what's happening to her or what won't ever happen to her is absolute terror. It's very sad, and it's also very scary because now you realize this person, like, she's just locked in a body. It's very sad.
Yeah, and that's one of the fun things of this setup, right? They really introduce her in a great way, which is Louis just sees this girl holding, he's walking through this plague-ridden part of the city, right? Which, talk about adding to the uselessness of life conundrum. And he just sees this girl holding her dead mom, and she's going to die. Like, she won't make it. So did he really save her, or did he just extend her torment? There's just a lot of extra things going on with that relationship, right? And there's the scene when she walks out to Louis when she wants to get Lestat's ass, right? And she does in just like a horrifying manner, right? Just cold-blooded as hell. But when she comes out in like almost like a white nightgown, and the way she's even like walking up behind him and talking, it's just, holy shit, this is unsettling, right? There's a like mature woman in there talking through this, and it's just it's horrid, right? Like she really makes your skin crawl, and she was amazing in this movie.
It's like ridiculous how well that those scenes work, where you're like, you can see her playing 30 plus at whatever 10, I think 11 at the time, and I don't know. I'm not always the biggest Kirsten Dunst fan, but like this is one where I'm like, I don't even know how you have the ability to do this performance. It's
at that age,
scary good.
Unbelievable.
Having the wherewithal to be able to pull this together is honestly, it's actually like scarier knowing that she was 12 and she did this. Like, I cannot imagine what kind of child she is to be 12 and be able to pull this off. Like, it's.
But again, I think it happens
incredible.
Sometimes with children actors. It's kind of like her vampire journey, right? They're just too young to know better, so they don't have the self-consciousness and the pulling back. Like in this movie, she just is a killing machine because it's like Lestat says, like, you are what you are, right? There's no running from it. You can drink rats and whatever. You are designed now to be this thing. And maybe that's what she is. But man, I just loved the three of them. And that segment I thought was fantastic. And then obviously like Lestat getting buried and coming back as the corpse. You're like, this is like top-notch horror stuff. I feel like the movie kind of skids a little bit when we get to Paris. I didn't know. It's weird because I love the imagery of the vampire theater. I don't know that was the best way to spend 30 minutes of the movie. Bryant, does this segment really do it for you? And what kind of stuff are you bonding with in this segment of the film?
I will say that this segment always it seemed to be like something was missing for me the first couple times I watched it. It again, like, is something where if you're one of the book readers, it's more enriched because the theater appears in different books, and you find that you like when in the second book, which is kind of funny. It's the first book is released in a meta way where it's like, oh, this is actually the interview,
the transcript
that got released, And then the second book has a similar meta fashion where it's like, Lestat read the first book by Louis and was like, Louis is fucking lying about so much shit. And he releases his own book about like, well, this is who I am and why. But in that second book, you find that Lestat, he's from Paris, and he
was Armand his maker. That was always my theory.
Armand was not his maker. His maker is actually a vampire, I think, named Magnus, who literally is like insane. He's crazy. He kidnaps Lestat, who is working in the theater at the time, and turns him, and then like jumps into a fire in front of him and dies. So that's why Lestat always says the thing of like, I didn't have a choice who made me, and my master told me nothing. And he's like, you know, sort of bitter about that. But he had an interaction with Armand where Armand had was like leader of another group of vampires in France or in Paris, where they lived by these very strict sort of old world views, almost like what he's doing now, but deeper. They all lived underground, and they only came out at night, and they saw themselves as cursed by God. And I can't remember exactly what occurs, but Lestat essentially is confronted by these vampires where they're like, hey, you're not living the way vampires are supposed to be living. You're like wearing these fine clothes and trying to be human. And he kind of just shatters their worldview and like makes the whole group like disband because they don't know what to do. And so Armand has always sort of got like a chip on his shoulder about Lestat because of that. He has to, his worldview is shattered. He has to kind of put it back together and finds this feeder. But to go back to your original question, I think what I find interesting about this segment, even though I think that you kind of have to dig for it, is everything with what we get through Armand and his communication. I think all the theater vampires are supposed to be sort of what they describe, these vampires who are locked in their time period, that they can't evolve, they are who they are. And that seems to be the downfall of vampires, is as Armand puts it, that they don't change with the world. The world changes and leaves them behind, and they get stuck where they are. And they need to find somebody or something to help them step into the new age in order to not have that happen. So these seem to just be, I think this is just a sequence where we're seeing like, there's something about Louis that represents the current age of disillusionment. And I think he mentions being at odds with everything, essentially not, this sort of existential like torment that I guess these individuals have. And these vampires don't have that, they're very much like, we're here to kind of be the evil, in the world. And I think that it's there for Louis to kind of look upon and be like, well, for what? What's the point?
Monstrous.
Right.
I love that sentiment. Yeah. The vampires not changing with the eras. It's one of my favorite things of the film, right? I like the idea that these vampires are still stuck in this aristocratic era where they can just commit their crimes on Front Street. Because I love the scene when the audience is shuffling out after they just like buffet that lady and they're like not clapping. They're all like, like just very quietly shuffling out. Like you're like, I wonder what the reviews are going to be at the pub, right? Like, well, that was fucked, But yeah, I like that because there was another thing I noticed this time too, which is they grab Claudia and kill her, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost as if they can't fathom that Louis would actually be attached to her and even fathom that he would want revenge. Like they're actually taken aback and caught off guard that this guy's going to want to get a piece. And I thought I love the idea of that. And we see it with Lestat too, when they're in the return to Louisiana. But I love that idea of you can just keep living, but that doesn't mean you're going to always have the life you had, right? Right, Alex, what do you think about this bit?
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly. It's interesting. I never thought of it this way, but they're sort of all Claudias in this regard. Like they don't change with the world. They don't progress with the world. And I think that's what makes Louis this aberration. Is Louis wants to progress. It's almost like the 7 stages of grief, and he's almost, that's my kid now. It's almost accepting of the fact that this is his lot in life, and now he's moving forward with it and saying like, all right, I'm going to like when we see him at the beginning of the movie, that's him like saying like, I'm ready to be a part of the world.
Yeah, your kid's just like, agrees. Dad, I love the theater of vampires, goddammit. I mean, but I think it's weird because I feel like this is the segment where it stalls a little bit because we have such a beautiful climax with Lestat and Claudia and Louis, right? And this moment does get into it because this is where we get the enormous payoff for Louis and Claudia, right? I love the fact that she can tell, because there's a fun thing they play with, right? Which is all the vampires are affected differently, right? The dark gift. So some people, like Lestat says he can read thoughts.
Right.
It seems like Armand might have some version of that as well. And maybe Claudia too, right? Because she knows that Louis wants to leave, right? And so I like the thought that she's just like, give me a mom again before you leave. And the lady being like, yeah, I lost a daughter. I want a child who can't die. And Louis like, that is a child that's already dead. I thought that part was really fun, right? And I liked the emotional culmination of that. And then him just saying, that was it. That was the last. Now I'm Lestat. I've given the curse out. So I'm not this kind of pure grief machine that I was, right? Now I'm also giving it to someone else. That's, you could say Claudia was an accident, right? But this lady wasn't. And so it has that really good emotional punch. But I thought the rest of that segment was a little slippery at times for me. It felt like we were trying to like re-jumpstart the movie, right? Like we already hit the peak and it was just hard to try to get back up. I will say though, I thought the final scene, well, I wish the final scene with Lestat was awesome. When he finds, not only I thought it was cool that he like goes to the movies to see colors. I thought that was really a beautiful sentiment. But I like his final, I like seeing Lestat, this scared vampire who's afraid of searchlights and the noise, and I thought that was awesome, right? What did you guys take away from this scene?
I always love that scene. I think again it was something where I think that I get more from that scene and the older that I get.
Yes,
because I understand it more. I think as a teenager, you're like, well, what happened? How did he become like?
Yeah,
this?
Why did he quit? Just biting ladies all the time. What's up?
but to see the reversals where Louis has all the power and the confidence and has sort of found somewhat of a place that he's comfortable with, and to have Lestat be so pathetic and helpless and fearful, and to have the seduction come back in where Lestat tries to go like, if you were just come be with me again, I can become who I was. And they have that kind of mirror what Armand was trying to do. Again, I think speaks to this interesting thing where you're like, all right, the film is too subtle to say straight out like, oh, Louis like this paragon, but he is this like unheard of quantity, I guess, in the vampire community.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's almost like, not only does he want to change, not only does he have these feelings, but I think it's like these other vampires, as much as they're like, we got rid of my human side, I got rid of that. They want it back, like, yeah. And Louis is someone who somehow has retained some humanity, and he's intensely attractive to them. And almost, I think someone talks about like quickening them. Like he's like this. He has this ability for some reason to give them new life, which is really, really interesting. So yeah, I think that final scene is really fascinating. And I love too that like it's another subtle thing, but I love that they actually do like some 80s costuming, that he's wearing like sort of
right
80s suits, like great
those
suits.
Fucking shoulder pad suits.
Love it.
But yeah, I mean, even just something as little as, he finds Lestat by a trail of dead rats, right? I just thought there was a lot of, but the moment in that scene to me is when he takes a step to Lestat and Lestat like jumps back, right? He's this fearful creature, right? And just imagining how long he's been in that room, in that chair. What was doing it for you in this bit, Alex?
Same as you, man. I mean, I think the vulnerability of Lestat is what always it's fun to see that juxtaposition, because he's like such an asshole throughout like the top third of this movie. And
just dancing with a mom's corpse and shit. Like,
there's still life in the old girl. You're like, you dick. Come on, man.
Very much like Tom Cruise in real life. Never.
So there is that like kind of, you're just like, oh, like he did get his comeuppance, but you're also, it is weird. Like you are like, this is sort of disappointing because you do want like this final face off between him and Louis, and and I think that was the thing I was wondering this. I was like, why do I feel satisfied yet kind of unsatisfied? Like it felt like the power dynamic had shifted, but I'm like, I kind of didn't want it to. Like I wanted them to be toe to toe, because that's how. Because Louis, I always thought like Louis could have taken Lestat anyways. He just chose not to in a lot of respects. So for there to be this like shift in the power dynamic made sense thematically, because Lestat of all creatures would be the one to like and as we found out, he did, like Queen of the Damned, but like he would be the one to move with the world, you know. And it's weird to find him in this place where he like can't. So I don't know. It's a great. I think it's one of my favorite like ending scenes.
Yeah.
But
well, I think there's a part of like the fiery battle, right? Like they had in the apartment is one thing, but I think there is something to Louis just seeing him and, you know, I'll just let time defeat you, right? I'll let your own appetites hollow you out, and you're as pathetic as can be, and by, you know, doing a head chop or whatever there with his fucking 80 karate hands or whatever. He's releasing Lestat from having to pay for what he did, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there's something to. I like the idea that Lestat is this hollowed out, and he's like, "Remember how I was," and he's just this frozen in time guy. And I'm not gonna lie, I think the last scene of this movie is one of the like 10% worst endings of all time, like bottom 10. That last scene is so bad. On just like a number of metrics, right? Like, I do like the idea that Louis brought Lestat back, like just getting a whiff of Louis. He's like, I'm ready to try again. But the jumping in the car and the like, come on, like turning Wham on the radio and shit. I was like, come on, that is not the best. I mean, honestly, I was like, if that's the last we saw of Lestat until he joined Korn and Queen of the Damned, like that would have been fine. That was an epic ending for him. I don't know. I didn't love that last. I liked the last bit with Christian Slater. I didn't love that final Lestat in the car scene. What do you think, Bryant? Did that do it for you? Did you like that part?
It's interesting. I do like that part, but I think it's because it's almost like the air tank exploding at the end of Jaws. Where you're like, if you think about it too much, you're like, what?
Yeah.
And much like Jaws, I don't know if listeners know this, but Jaws, the book doesn't end that way. The shark just dies right before it bites Brody, and he's like, well, thank God that happened.
God blew up the air tank. Yeah,
it would be very anticlimactic. But I mean, that's like the book is having a very a story about like the man versus nature, and the fact that man can't defeat nature. The movie obviously has a different Spielberg-esque, bang at the end. And I think this has the same thing. I think they wanted something big and kind of fun right at the end to grab audiences. It's not this way in the book. The book, Lestat goes underground for a while after seeing Louis, and just ended up coming back later due to rock music. Hearing rock music is what pulls him out. But,
okay, I have questions about that, but yeah, I mean, there is something to it. Feels like this is the like, if we're gonna ever make a franchise out of this, we have to have Tom Cruise as Lestat back. But yeah, I thought it kind of undercut this like beautiful bow on this very introspective, kind of quieter than you would imagine vampire story.
It's something you would have to like explain or recontextualize if you were doing a second film, and it's really just, I think it's there to make audience go, "Woo, whoa, man," you know?
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's the thing that always throws me off, is because Louis is the main character of the movie, Lestat is essentially the antagonist, yet Lestat gets the like final punch, and he's really supposed to be the main character, because he's the main vampire for Anne Rice's novels. So it's for those of us who haven't read them, it's very kind of jarring, because for me, I remember watching the first time like, why is that other guy coming back? I don't understand what he had to do with anything. Like, he's just getting another shot because
Xenu,
but like
okay, wait, I had to ask the Queen of the Damned question, because I remember seeing that movie in theaters and just being like, what the fuck is this movie, right? Like, what is happening? Even Aaliyah couldn't save it for us. Yeah, it's like literally Woodstock 99, but with like fangs and leather and shit. But is that how it was in the book? Lestat became like a new metal rock star?
It is, but I will say
really? It's done well in the books? You like
it's
that?
It's all in execution. I mean, I haven't read that book in a long time, I will say, but it did not. I did not see the Queen of the Damned film in my mind when I was reading it. It's very much, it's very much it's more in the 80s. First off, it's an 80s story.
Got it. Okay, that would make more sense.
So he was probably more in like Bauhaus than like Korn.
Right, White Snake or something. But
now him as a member of Motley Crue seems exactly right.
right. Seriously. But that's kind of the attitude of it, and it's more that like Lestat is awoken by like these songs that are being sung from a specific band that's near where he's buried himself, and he sort of like just shows up and becomes their lead singer and is this character of like the vampire Lestat. He ends up reading Louis's book, and he's just like, well, maybe it's time for me to come back, and it's more of like, instead of being focused on the music, it's more of like, oh, here's Lestat going out into the world and being like to the entire vampire society, like, fuck you. Like, I'm out here. I'm going to say I'm a vampire. And if you want to come and get me, come on, do it. Like, and so
awesome.
you kind of have like his story filled in the background of like why he is a vampire, why he is the way that he was depicted in Interview with a Vampire. And you get this more nuanced story of like, oh, so this is what Lestat's dealing with and what he was trying to do. And maybe like the first book we were seeing totally through Louis's eyes. Mm-hmm. But I would say that like, I feel like if we had a Queen of the Damned that had the same attention to detail and sort of nuance that this film had, I would be interested. But I feel like they very much wanted to shift it into a sort of hot topic, underworld type story, and it's like it's just not really that story, you know. That's not what these stories are about.
I will say this, as a teenager at that age, the wrestling team that I was a part of, this was like the CD. Like, this was on every time we lifted weights. This was the CD that we were like lifting weights to. We're like, like we're feeling stuff and we're lifting things, and like this was like this was like probably like a top 5 high school record for me. I don't know if that's sad or awesome, but you know, you got to be honest.
Can it be both?
Yeah, you got to be. I mean, that is the story of my life.
Jonathan Davis is the voice of Lestat in that,
and that's what, because again, outing myself, I was a huge Korn with a K fan. It was just that time. That's just what we did. Mm-hmm. But he lost the rights to it, or there was some like contractual dispute, right? So on the CD version that you would buy, they had David Draymond from Disturbed, Chester Bennington from Linkin Park, and Wayne Static like re-recorded the songs that Jonathan Davis had made and sung.
Really?
But on the CD has like this all-star cast of like other new metal guys singing it. So it became this like really weirdly beloved album in the metal community. And then we all went and saw the movie and we're like, woof. You know, Buzz's girlfriend, woof. But I don't know. I mean, maybe I like the idea of you saying Lestat essentially did like the Tony Stark and Iron Man MCU moment, where he's like, I am a vampire, cut. And then we get 28 movies after. But so we've covered a lot of ground. So if both of you would like, where do you kind of end on this movie? Like, what is the just like culmination at, now that we've talked it all out, what is the real sticking point? Why you still love this movie and come back? Or Barbara, did you find anything that would maybe bring you back? Yeah.
You go first.
I think that I can find a movie within this movie that could be good, but I think it would...
You're so political and nice about just eviscerating this movie.
I think that I think what's amazing, and I think maybe Alex mentioned this earlier, but where I think that this movie is that it was ahead of its time in depicting a complex, non-heteronormative relationship, and where I think it could really excel is cut out everything in France, cut out the entire theater of the vampires. It just slows everything down. It's not necessary, and just focus on this core relationship of Lestat, Louis, and then Claudia, and how she brings everything together. Because in a way, I think that there could be this amazing movie about if Louis, both in human form and then in vampiric form, is this abused individual who has, and is then preyed upon by Lestat. That could be this amazing, arc of a character that at the end, in the last scene, and coming back and finding Lestat as this hollowed out, core of an individual, and then Louis, their power dynamics shifting so amazingly. That could be a really interesting movie. I'd work on some of the acting and rehearsals a little bit more. But that's just
Brad Pitt. We have notes. Yeah,
we have some notes. Let's discuss.
For cast.
yeah. Back to the drawing board, Brad Pitt.
I'll give Brad Pitt some love.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But I think that's where I leave it. Unfortunately,
He probably would agree with you. He'd probably
he'd be like, I
mean,
know, I was terrible. I was bad.
he said that he didn't have anything to do in this film, so it speaks to the empty vessel comment that we were talking about earlier. But for me, this is, and again, maybe I'm like these vampires. I'm stuck in my time, you know. But this is my ultimate vampire film. This is the way I would like to see vampires. The depiction of the mythology, the way they evolve above. It seems like above sexuality, above any kind of desire beyond, physical, I guess, desire. That everything is about like companionship or the blood. You know, I like that elevated approach to what they are. I like that they become more beautiful, to become more predatory to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that really speaks to me of what I think would make vampires the most interesting, I guess, mythology wise. But I also like, now looking back on it, I think what I really like about this film, and maybe I was biting into or nibbling at when I was younger, is there are many, if you're a big vampire connoisseur, there's many stories about like the reluctant vampire, the vampire that struggles with what they are, or evil. And that is present here, but I think it's done in a much more nuanced way, where it's not just like, oh, am I going to be evil? I think what this story really tells that's interesting is like, we can't escape our human flaws or human weaknesses by becoming these creatures. And it's interesting to see this like attraction of like, oh, you can become more, you can get this, you can get that, you'll be something more than human, but they're still at the mercy of their human flaws, even the ones that sort of deny it. I think Louis is just more honest about where he is, while we see Armand and Lestat also be affected by their human flaws, and in the end struggle with human things. I mean, they're not like lamenting that they're like going to live forever or having to eat, like Queen of the Damned. They're not like, we have to defeat the ultimate vampire. It's all about like, what's the point of living this long if I don't have love or companionship in my life? What is the point of living this long if I don't know what the point of existence is, and why do I exist as this supernatural creature if there's nothing? You know, is there a God, or is this all just pointless, and this is just another level, you know, of that meaningless, you know, existence? And what do you do with that? Like, what do you do with meaningless existence if you exist forever?
Yeah, I think we all definitely wrestle with that one a lot. I think that's what I take away, right? Is so many of the vampire movies, it's about the fear of being hunted by a vampire and someone biting you, and that can be great, right? What I like about this one is that it really kind of gets at some of the cores of what I think are the really fun, deeper layers of the vampire curse, right? Is the Peter Pan fantasy, it takes so long. It's that you can only just be pure appetite for so long before what's left. And I like the kind of the cursed nature of these characters and them having to actually deal with emotional tumult, right? A lot of them, like even Lost Boys does a little bit of that, but it's so fast and teenage, right? It's like a Ramones song. It's over before it even really like can get in on that.
Sure.
Even if it still had something to say. Right. And I think this one taking the time to, again, see Lestat is just this husk, and imagine what Claudia is going through and those kind of things, right? I think that philosophical level of this one is what I really like about it, as an addition to kind of the vampire oeuvre. Alex, what final thoughts on Interview with the Vampire?
Yeah, I think the meditation of it all is really fascinating to me. Like, I think it's probably the more interesting like intellectual take on vampirism that I've seen in a lot of movies. Like, instead of being obsessed with like the rules and what the rules are actually very simple.
I'm not into the rules thing. They just kind of eschew that in this one.
Yeah,
they just,
like the rules are very simple. It's literally like, like they do it at the very top, and he's like, "What are these?" And he's like,
"Velociraptor in your apartment?" Yeah. Alex, is it feeding time at the pit?
pretty much. Yeah, it goes.
That's amazing. I love that, Alex.
It's so annoying. No, it's great. Yeah, I like that there's not a lot of focus on rules, and it's much more about just living or unliving, so to speak. Like there's a lot of this. There's a lot of just about how to exist, and it's very the existential crisis that everybody goes through in this movie is really interesting because we don't talk about that almost like. There's just not a lot of like. I think maybe a couple of movies cover it in a less interesting way, but I like the existential crisis that all these characters go through because essentially there should be no existential crisis. Like their existence is pretty simple feed, and there's more to it than that for this movie. I like that a lot. It
still hurts, even though you're dead and you can't die. It still hurts the time. All right,
still
here's
hurts.
the final question. I have one final question.
All right.
If Louis tells you this story, do you still want to be a vampire?
No.
Nah.
Oh fuck yeah, dude, 100%. I want it all the way.
Oh man, I think I'm in the same boat where I would say no, I should not. But there's going to be that I think inside me that there's like
I've done this mortal
better,
coil
right?
shit long enough. Yeah, I want to see what's on the other side. And then worst case scenario, I'll just jump out at like noon one day and be done. The vampires just don't jump out. Just jump out and be done when you're done. I want to be a vampire. I think I didn't learn the lesson of the movie. But all right, thank you guys so much for joining us.
So much.
You guys were awesome. Would you like to tell everyone one more time where they can find you guys and what you're working on?
Sure, absolutely. You can find us at fanbasepress.com. We're on all of the social medias. And definitely check out our currently running comic book series, Nuclear Power. You can find it at fanbasepress.com. You can find us at nuclearpowercomic.com. It's available digitally on Comixology. And if you have a library card, you can get it through your local library at Hoopla as well. So definitely check it out. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Fantastic. Guys, thank you so much. This was wonderful, even though my kid was screaming in the background.
And likewise for us. So
Thank
thank
you.
You all
so
got
much.
kids.
Yeah, we're all still humans. We have life around us. It's fine.